The Sony FX2 versus the FX3 versus the FX30. These are three completely different cameras with different use cases. So which one should you buy? Let's talk about it. I've owned the Sony FX3 for several years now, and it is one of my favorite cameras ever. But since the release of the FX3, Sony has also come out with the FX30 and then just recently the FX2. So let's compare these three cameras and see which one might actually be the perfect camera for you, because it's not always the most expensive one. Yes, the FX3 out of these three cameras is the most expensive, but that doesn't mean it's the right camera for you. The perfect camera for you is the one that meets all of your needs, fits in your budget, and accomplishes what you need to accomplish for video. And let's just start there. These are all video-centric cameras. They're in the FX cinema line of Sony, and they are very much video-first cameras. Let's just quickly cover some technical specs. The FX2 and the FX3 are both full-frame cameras, but the FX30 is an APS-C crop sensor. So the FX30 is going to stand out in this lineup as a crop sensor camera. So let's talk about the difference between full frame and APS-C. With a full frame sensor, you're going to get better depth of field and better low light performance because the sensor is larger. So an APS-C sensor, obviously the cons are going to be that it's a smaller sensor, it's not going to perform quite as well in low light, and you're not going to get the same amount or kind of look of that depth of field in your image. That's one of the simplest ways to consider sensor size. There is a lot more technicality to that, but that's just an easy way to think about it. So you're dealing with three different sensors in these three different cameras. The FX3, the FX2 both have full frame sensors, but they're not the same sensor. So let's talk about megapixels. The FX2 has a 33 megapixel sensor, the FX3 has a 12 megapixel sensor, and the FX30 has a 26 megapixel sensor. So when you're making your purchase decision, you need to decide if you want to go the full frame route or the APS-C route. And your biggest difference here is going to be price, because APS-C sensors are cheaper. Because they're smaller and don't have as much functionality, APS-C cameras are cheaper than full frame cameras. So you need to consider what's your budget and are you okay with some of the limitations of an APS-C camera. They still have great image, they still perform great, and they could meet all of the needs that you would ever need for video. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other, it just means which one is right for you. So that's the first question that you need to answer. Let's move on and talk about image stabilization. All three of these cameras have Sony's 5-axis in-body image stabilization. So they're really comparable across the board as far as stability and getting really stable shots. Now, as far as video resolution goes, you're getting awesome 4K 24 frames out of all three of these cameras. That's not even going to be an issue. They all have excellent dynamic range, and you can get 4K 24 frames per second. With the new Sony FX2, you can actually get a 4K via an oversampled 7K. So as far as these resolutions, once you start going up in frame rate, whether they crop in or not, with the FX3, there's no crop until you get to 120 frames per second, but then it's only a slight crop. With the FX2, there is a crop starting at 60 frames per second, and then there's more of a crop at 120 frames per second. And obviously with the FX30, you're already in that 1.5 times crop with the APS-C sensor. But when you get to 120 frames per second, there's even a little bit more of a crop. So if you're wanting, the least amount of crop for slow motion, then you'll want to go with the FX3. All three of these cameras actually have dual base ISOs, which is super useful. So with the Sony FX2, you have 800 and 4000. With the Sony FX3, you have 800 and 12,800. And with the Sony FX30, you have 800 and 2500. So let's talk about low light performance. Obviously, the Sony FX3 is going to perform the best in low light. It has that dual base ISO of 12,800, which you just cannot beat. Plus, it has that 12 megapixel sensor, which is going to make that low light noise look better than it will with higher megapixel sensors. So your low light king here is the FX3. But these other cameras are still gonna perform really great because they have a dual base ISO. I think it's really cool that in the Sony FX2, they bumped it up to 4000, because that's a lot more useful than the 2500 you get with the FX30. But again, this is going to depend on how much low light are you shooting. If you are constantly needing to get shots like at night, or you shoot a lot of stuff outdoors with only street lights, you really might want to consider the FX3 with that 12,800, Or if it's not quite as necessary, the FX2 with the 4000. And again, it just depends on your needs. You can always throw a prime lens on there to open up and get more light at like an f1.2, f1.4. So there are workarounds when you need to add light in to your scene, and you can obviously even add in actual lights if you needed it that bad. So that's where resolution, ISO, and low light performance comes into play. Let's kind of step back and put these three cameras in perspective for just a second and talk about their sensors. So Sony has several different sensors that they put in their cameras, and they tend to overlap. So let's talk about this. For the FX3, the same sensor that's in the FX3 is also in the A7S3 and the FX6. So that just means that that same 12 megapixel sensor is actually in the A7S3 camera body, which is why a lot of people use them as like an A and B setup, because it's the exact same sensor. Their bodies are just kind of made differently, and they have like maybe some slightly different features in the menu, but they are essentially the same camera. And if you think about the FX2 has the exact same sensor as the A7 IV and the A7C2, which is what I'm shooting on right now. So the differences here would be that the image from the FX2 and the A7 IV, or like the image from my A7C2, are going to be very similar, but there are different features in the camera body that you're getting. For example, in the FX2, you're getting a fan, which you don't have in the A7 IV or the A7C2. You're also getting the cinema firmware, time code, full-size HDMI, and that oversampling from 7K to 4K. So it's little differences, and it's differences in features and some internal firmware that's different, but as far as the image, it's going to be very similar. The same thing goes for the FX30. The FX30 actually has the same sensor as the A6700. You're just adding some more features like S-Cinetone, time code, LUT import, and things like that. So that kind of gives a bigger picture of how these three cameras fit into the Sony lineup and what makes them the cinema kind of set apart. It's some of those features and little details that you get, and how they redesigned some of the body to be more video focused. But those sensors overlap into other cameras in the Sony lineup. So let's wrap this all up and talk about who these cameras are actually for. Obviously, one of your first big considerations is going to be your budget. And the three of these cameras kind of all sit respectively at about $2,000, $3,000, and $4,000, thereabouts. So there is a huge difference in price between the three of these cameras, and that could be the differentiating factor for you when you're going to make this purchase. There also could be the question of, are you wanting to maybe take some photos with it? If that's the case, the FX30 and the FX3 don't have a viewfinder at all, so you might want to consider the FX2, which does have that really nice adjustable viewfinder. From there, it really comes down to analyzing all of these specs and what you're actually needing out of the camera. Are you shooting a lot of slow motion and you don't want to crop? Then you might want to go with the FX3. Do you need something that's really good in low light? Do you need something that's more affordable? Do you prefer a crop sensor so that you can buy lenses and it actually kind of crop in if they're not made for APS-C? If you buy full frame lenses and put them on a crop sensor camera, it will do that 1.5 times crop. So are you wanting to get more distance out of your lens? Then you might want to go with a crop sensor. Do you really want to make sure that you have that full frame look? Are you wanting to get into the full frame ecosystem, but you don't have an FX3 budget? Maybe go with the FX2. It all comes down to figuring out what exactly do you need out of the camera, what are you going to be using it for, and think about your future plan of what cameras would I pair this with. What B camera am I going to purchase next? Or am I purchasing one of these for a B camera to another camera that I already own? And it really comes down to just analyzing what are my needs and which one of these cameras fits my needs. Anyway, I just wanted to make this video to hopefully help you make a better buying decision and really think about, I know people hype up these cameras all the time, but you really need to not buy the one that's just the most hyped up, but buy the one that would really fit your needs so that you can actually level up your filmmaking skills and have a tool, because that's what these are, have a tool that really gets the job done and really fits your needs and your style. So anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope you found some value in it. And if you did, be sure to check out some other gear comparisons on my channel.